Okay, hear me out for just a second. What if the moon isn't what we think it is? When NASA crashed a rocket into the moon during the Apollo 12 mission in 1969, it didn't just behave like a solid rock, it rang like a bell for over an hour. And let's be honest, that's not normal. And it wasn't just once. NASA repeated this on multiple missions and the vibrations lasted for hours. Now here's where it gets even stranger. Moon craters don't behave the way they should on solid rock upon impact. The surface is loaded with unusually high amounts of titanium. So when you actually look at the data NASA has on the moon, things start to get really weird. And in the 1970s, two Soviet scientists even agreed that the moon is not natural, but artificial. And they weren't the only ones. Even our ancestors agreed. So if that's true, who made it? Who brought it over, and more importantly, why? I know, hearing that the moon might be an artificial spaceship sounds insane, but to understand why even scientists have explored this idea, we first have to look at how strange our moon actually is. We grow up just accepting that it's there. It lights up the night, it controls the tides, but when you actually look closer, some of the details just don't make sense. Let's start with solar eclipses, because this is where things begin to feel strangely precise. The sun is roughly 400 times larger than the moon, yet it also happens to be about 400 times further away from Earth, which means that from our perspective, the moon almost perfectly covers the sun during a total eclipse. Maybe it's just coincidence, but it's almost unnervingly perfect. When you compare the moon to other moons in our solar system, you notice that it's unusually large for the planet it orbits, sitting at around 27% the size of Earth. That's huge in comparison to the Earth, and you cannot see this anywhere else in the solar system. It's just us. Because of that size, the moon just doesn't sit there. It plays a crucial role in stabilizing the Earth's rotation and keeping our axis relatively steady, which in turn helps maintain a stable climate over long periods of time. Without the moon, Earth would behave very differently, with far more extreme shifts in climate and unpredictable changes that would make complex life much harder to sustain. So, this isn't just some random object in the sky. It's almost like it's exactly the size and distance it needs to be for life here to exist. Naturally, scientists have spent decades trying to explain how something so large and so important ended up in that position. Over time, a few different ideas have been suggested, including the moon forming alongside Earth, or space debris being captured by Earth's gravity, then collecting together over billions of years to form the moon. But the most widely accepted explanation is known as the giant impact theory. According to this idea, around 4.5 billion years ago, a Mars-sized body called Theia collided with early Earth, sending debris into orbit that eventually came together to form the moon. To be honest, these conditions for the moon to even form this way would have to be so perfect that it's hard to accept it happened purely by chance. Samples from the moon were brought back during the Apollo missions. Scientists noticed something that didn't quite fit. The moon has a much smaller iron core and a much lower overall density than you would expect if it had been formed directly from Earth's material. Some of the regions of the moon also contain unusually high concentrations of titanium, far higher than what we would typically see on Earth's surface. If the moon was really created from Earth's debris, you would expect the two to be far more alike, but they're not even close. And that leaves a gap that the giant impact theory just doesn't fully explain. On their own, none of this really proves anything, but when you put it together, it starts to feel like we're missing something. When you look at the impact craters on the moon, something stands out. Many of them don't get significantly deeper as they get larger. Instead, they tend to flatten out and be the same depth, almost as if something beneath the surface is limiting how far that they can penetrate. That's not what you would expect from impacts hitting solid rock at those speeds. You would at least expect different sizes and depths of the craters, but strangely, most of these craters are uniform. And when you consider the unusually high concentrations of titanium, it would probably be the perfect material to use to build such a thing. Then you have the moon's magnetic properties. Some of the rocks brought back during the Apollo missions showed signs of magnetism, despite the moon not having a magnetic field at all. I mean, it had one, but science says that was at least 1.5 billion years ago, which raises the question, where did that magnetism come from? Is it artificially created from inside the moon? I mean, who knows? I'm just someone asking questions. Then there's the Apollo missions. In 1969, during Apollo 12, NASA placed seismic instruments on the surface to measure how the moon responds to impact. Then, instead of leaving it alone, they deliberately sent the Saturn V rocket crashing into the moon at high speed. The impact was massive and caused the moon to vibrate for almost an hour. And it wasn't just once. In 1970, during Apollo 13, they repeated the test. Again, the vibrations continued for over 3 hours. NASA described it as ringing like a bell.
One unexpected result came from the seismic experiments conducted during Apollo. When hardware impacted the lunar surface, the vibrations built up to a peak after several minutes and continued for nearly an hour. Scientists observed that the moon rang like a bell, vibrating and resonating like a gong after being struck. The moon does have moonquakes, rings like a bell when it's struck by a meteorite.
Now, compare that to Earth. When something hits our planet or when an earthquake occurs, the shaking you feel might last seconds, maybe a few minutes, but most of that energy is absorbed quickly because of the Earth's density. And then, in 1970, 2 Soviet scientists took a good look at all the evidence they had on the moon. They listed all the coincidences, the density, and the internal structure. They concluded that the moon might not be entirely natural, and proposed that it could have been built somewhere else and placed into orbit. In ancient Greece, there were people known as the Proselines, literally meaning before the moon. These weren't described as mythical beings, but actual people who existed in a time before the moon arrived. But this idea of the non-existence of the moon isn't isolated. On the other side of the world in South America, the Tiwanaku civilization also accepted a time before a moon was in the sky. They hinted at a time where the moon arrived roughly 12,000 years ago. These were people who built massive stone structures with precision we still struggle to fully explain, and their entire culture was deeply tied to astronomical observation. They weren't guessing about the sky. They studied it, tracked it, and built their world around it. There were several cultures around the world who described a time when the moon simply wasn't there. Different continents, languages, separate histories, yet they all pointed to the same idea. Now, things become even more strange. According to the Zulu legends, the moon is hollow and was placed there. It was brought here hundreds of generations ago by 2 beings known as the Water Brothers, Wawane and Mopanku. These weren't described as ordinary humans. They were said to have scaly skin, or in other words, a reptilian race. The legends state that before the moon arrived, there were no seasons and that the planet was engulfed by a canopy of water vapor. The people did not feel the strong glare of the sun that we do now, and they could only see the sun through a watery mist. When the moon was put in place 12,000 years ago, the water canopy fell to Earth and caused a powerful tidal wave. Let's step back for 1 second and go back to a point in Earth's history that we know happened. Around 13,000 years ago, during a period known as the Younger Dryas, the planet went through a sudden and violent shift in climate. Temperatures dropped rapidly, ecosystems collapsed, and in the end, it caused a worldwide catastrophic flood. And guess what? A flood is mentioned in practically every ancient culture we know, from Mesopotamian to biblical narratives to ancient traditions in South America. If the moon was flung up into the sky 12,000 years ago, coinciding roughly with the Younger Dryas, triggering a global flood and a complete reset of the planet, then the Zulu legends weren't myths. They were right.
Aristotle wrote that the Pelasgians occupied Arcadia before there was a moon in the sky above the earth. For this reason, they were called proselynes. The period when the earth was moonless is probably the most remote recollection of mankind.
I understand that myths, legends, and stories are not exactly proof of anything, but even today, for a moon that's supposed to be a dead, frozen wasteland, there's certainly a lot of things happening up there, so let's take a look. We have been told that the moon is a lifeless, desolate place. If that's the case, then why are there photographs of structures and pyramids? You can clearly see that these are not random boulders or huge rocks, but look identical to the pyramids that we have on Earth. You have a structure here that looks like an artificial spire, and from the looks of it, that's a pretty tall building. And what about these boulder tracks? Some of these go on for miles, and in almost perfectly straight lines. They say it's caused by impact events where rocks get dislodged or gravity causes them to roll off slopes. I mean, that's fair enough, but how on earth do you get boulder tracks going uphill and then downhill so perfectly like you see here? Like it's been completely smoothed out. You see what I did there? How on earth? Because we're not on Earth, we're on the moon. Sorry, terrible joke. Yes.
That joke did not land, just like the moon landing.
What are you talking about? We went to the moon. Carl Wolf, a former US Air Force technician, also saw something he wasn't supposed to see. He was an electronics technician in the 1960s who apparently had high level of clearance. Wolf claimed that while working at a secure facility, he was shown images of the moon that weren't part of any public release.
I was asked to go over to this facility on Langley Air Force Base where the NSA was bringing in the information from the lunar orbiter. While I'm in there, I said to him, I'm really fascinated with this process. How did they get the images from the lunar orbiter to the laboratory here? So he was showing me how all this worked, and he said, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And I said, whose? What do you mean, whose? He said, yes, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And at that point, I became frightened and I was a little terrified. And then he pulled out one of these mosaics and showed this base, which had geometric shapes. There were towers, there were spherical buildings. There were very tall towers and things that looked somewhat like radar dishes, but they were large structures. Every day that I went home, I would think to myself, I can't wait to hear about this on the news, And, so I'd turn on the TV and I'd look at the news to see if they're going to announce we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And of course, here it is 30-some years later, and we still haven't heard about it.
Honestly, we can go much deeper into this, and I think we have only really scratched the surface. But after all the information out there, we have to admit that the moon is bizarre. Whether you believe it's just a space rock or something else, some of the anomalies we discussed can be scientifically explained, and that's fair enough. But many of the other anomalies we still struggle to explain today. You also have to consider this. Our ancestors didn't have the technology, the communication, or the global reach we have today. They recorded what they saw the only way they could, through stories, carvings, and drawings. They weren't connected. They weren't sharing ideas across continents, and yet similar themes appear again and again. Yes, they are not identical, but close enough to make you stop and think, because wherever they were describing, they were all looking up at the same sky.